At this time, I'd like to welcome our presenter, Candice Hart. Candice operates as a University of Illinois Extension educator out of the Decatur office. She holds degrees from the University of Illinois in horticulture production and management, with an emphasis on floriculture, and also a master's degree in agricultural education. She has an eye for design and enjoys creating arrangements and containers. She is also the state Master Gardener specialist, and as such supports our Illinois Master Gardener program. So without any further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Candice. Again, input questions into the chat box and we'll monitor them. Candice will present for about 30 minutes and then actually do an arrangement live presentation, and then we'll address some questions at the end. So thank you, Candice.
Excellent, thanks, Ned. I'm gonna go ahead and stop my video for now, just so I make sure my internet and everything stays good. But welcome everybody, thanks for hopping on to chat about growing and designing cut flowers, my favorite topic to talk about. So I'm based here in Bloomington, so I'm in central Illinois, so not too much blooming yet, but definitely getting into the spring fever, getting ready for all of this. So we're going to cover some of the basics of growing kind of cut flowers in your garden. I've pared down my slides a little bit on the handout. You'll have kind of a more extensive plant list than what we'll go through today, just so you have kind of some other ideas. But we're going to focus on kind of the annuals, perennials, bulbs today, and kind of give you some of that basic cut flower knowledge. So first step with any garden, of course, is to choose your site. So let's talk specifically about a flower garden and how that comes into play. So obviously your sunlight conditions are going to be an important factor. Most of the ones that we're going to look at today are going to be sun lovers, kind of like having a vegetable garden. You tend to have more things that are going to prefer that sunny location, but we will cover a couple of shade things in there. Soil quality, of course, is important. So get that soil test so you know what kind of nutrient levels you're dealing with, if you need to add organic matter, all of that. But I myself tend to grow a lot in a raised bed type of production system, and I'll show you a picture of that here. For me, it was just a lot easier to bring in fresh topsoil and add compost and just kind of start fresh. And for me, it's just a lot easier to maintain in terms of weeds and harvesting and things like that. So I tend to grow a lot in raised beds, but you can absolutely grow flowers in a traditional kind of ground bed as well, like you would a vegetable garden or a landscape bed. And I also try to tuck as many cut flowers as I can into my landscape area. So any landscape that I have, sure, it's gonna have aesthetically pleasing landscape plants in there, but for me, anything I'm putting in there, I'm also considering, is this going to be a good cut flower or a good cut foliage that I can use in arrangement? So for example, daylilies are not something you're going to find in my gardens, just because, as the name implies, that cut flower only lasts a day. So it's a beautiful landscape plant, but from a floral designer's standpoint, it's not your top perennial suggestion. So soil quality is important. Accessibility to water, obviously, also very important, just like any other type of garden. And then convenience is key too. You're going to be harvesting these flowers at different stages. So it's important to be able to get out there frequently to enjoy the garden, but also to be able to know when it's going to be time to harvest. So site is important. So this is my little corner of the planet here that I tend to grow most of my cut flowers in. So you'll notice behind that fence there, that's my backyard. So you can see why there's a lot of shade back there. I have very tall maples that pretty much cover my whole backyard. So I have to kind of rely on any of the side yard and front yard essentially to tuck in my sun lovers. So when I moved in, this was all grass here. And then that's, like I said, where I started to bring in raised beds, bring in soil to those, and then start to grow flowers in those cut beds. So those are going to get full sun all day, which is ideally what you're going to want. So every year I rotate things through there like you would with your vegetable garden and grow different flowers in there, mostly annuals, which will cover in those beds. So always kind of moving things around in those. I also, like I mentioned, try to incorporate anything into the landscaping that I can. So the photo on the left is what was there when I moved into this home. So you can see the previous owners, clearly not gardeners. They had a lot of landscape rock, which if you've ever dealt with that, you know that struggle. So that was cleared out. And then over the last couple of years, I've been slowly kind of improving that soil in there and filling that with perennials and grasses and shrubs that I can use in design. So don't be afraid to take a previous landscape bed and really transition it into something that's aesthetically pleasing, but also something that you can cut from. That's always what I'm looking to do. So that's my little corner of growing that I'm always trying to expand as much as I can. So let's talk about how you get started with that. So the first step with growing cut flowers is to figure out, okay, what kind of plants am I going to start with? And it depends if you're doing annuals or perennials, of course. But with annuals, the biggest question is, okay, will I start these from seed, or am I going to purchase transplants either from the local garden center or from a wholesaler that sells plugs or smaller plants? So seed, of course, is excellent, especially if you have a great seed starting area. If you're already doing vegetable seed starting, it's all the same principles for flower seed starting, of course. You just need a good spot that you can have enough warmth and enough light, or an area to plug in grow lights. I was saying at the start of the call, that's my goal this weekend, is I need to get my area set up in the garage with all my grow lights and get my seeds going, because I feel a little behind for the year. But I tried to grow, a good portion of my annuals from seed in the spring, but I also will purchase small transplants from wholesale plug growers, meaning that, so for a home gardener, this probably isn't something you're going to do unless you have some friends that you want to split up with it. So for example, let's say eucalyptus. I like to grow eucalyptus as a foliage. I could start that from seed, or I can also purchase a flat of eucalyptus, which is going to have about 125 plants in it. So quite a few plants to get started for just kind of the home gardener scale. But I know that if I want that, I need to purchase it like that, because I'm not going to likely find much eucalyptus in the local garden center. So if you're looking for something kind of unique and specific, you're either going to need to start it from seed yourself, or go through more of a specialized producer for cut flower growers. Okay, so that's your first decision. Transplants, of course, is going to be a lot easier, especially if you don't have a good spot to start seeds. Okay. The other thing to think about is, now you've got your plants figured out, what are you going to plant them in, and do you need to support them? That's something that you may not think a lot about with other types of plants, but with cut flowers, we always are striving to grow a plant that has a very straight stem. So for example, if I was growing a snapdragon as a cut flower and I want the stem to be about, let's say, 24 inches long, I know if I'm going to plant that in my raised beds, it's naturally not going to end up with a very straight stem unless I give it some type of support. The wind is going to blow it over, things like that. So I also need to think about, when I'm preparing this space, is what type of support might I need. So for example, you can create your own type of support system with stakes and dowel rods and string to kind of create a mesh. Basically, all you're looking for is kind of a framework of strings or mesh that you put on when the plants are short. And then as they go through it, they're more supported from side to side. If it is a windy day, they're going to be supported by that mesh on either side. So as we go through some of them today, I'll kind of mention if it needs staking or not. One of the big ones I have to stake every season, of course, are dahlias. Love dahlias. We'll talk about those. But this is one where the plant itself is going to get 3-4 feet in height, and you have pretty long stems on the flowers. So they definitely need some type of support system to keep those supported, so they're not all flopping over and that you end up with those nice straight stems. Okay, so just another thing to consider as you're kind of thinking about what plants you're going to pick. over the years, I have tended to grow kind of less and less of the things that are rather high maintenance that need a lot of netting, because it's just a labor factor to put in. If I forget to do it, or if I'm too late doing it, then you've kind of wasted that whole crop sometimes if your stems are just not usable from kind of a design standpoint. So something to think about. So we're going to go through some examples here of great ones that you can think about. Some of these you might already grow in your garden, but if not, these would be some other ones to think about growing as a cut flower. So starting with annuals, of course. So these are going to be the ones that typically you could start most of these from seed yourself very easily, or some of them you can also even direct seed right into the garden, which is great. So looking at a couple examples here, we've got starting off Zinnias. If you've never grown cut flowers before, this is one of the ones I recommend starting with. You can direct seed Zinnias straight into your garden bed later in the spring. And most of these annuals are going to be cut and come again, meaning that I can harvest this zinnia and a week later I'll have new growth and I can do another harvest. So you can get many, many harvests off of it, which is great. So zinnias are a great one to start with. You have a lot of colors to choose from, which is also really great. Strawflower is another one that I love, and I tend to start from seed. This is one that dries very well. So if you're one that likes to craft things or make wreaths, things like that, strawflower is a great one for that. It's basically dry already on the stem. So it makes an excellent dried flower. And again, you've got quite a few colors to choose from. Celosias, love celosias as a cut flower, and also again as a dried flower. You can grow the shorter kind of stem length plume celosias, which are beautiful in the landscape also. If you're not even going to harvest them, they're just a great landscape plant as well. But what's even more fun, I think, are the crested celosias, where you have that really kind of brain-like appearance to the flower head. Instead of having a tall plume, it has more of a textured, a rounded appearance, which is really fun. So celosias are very easy to grow from seed also. Gomphrena is another great one, or globe amaranth. It also will dry incredibly well and has a lot of color selections to choose from. Love those. Amaranth are great. You can grow upright amaranth, which would be this guy here. This is going to be a taller plant. It's going to take up a little bit more space, probably more in that 4 to 5 foot range. So it's definitely kind of a showstopper in the garden, but beautiful colors to choose from. And again, this would also dry very well. And you can also grow Lovelace bleeding or the hanging amaranthus as well, which is going to need some staking. So instead of growing upright, it's going to have these flower heads that kind of hang down for a cool look. So Amaranthus is great. Cosmos is also very easy to start with from seed. This one in particular is more of kind of a double, triple petaled variety, so it has a ton of petals, but traditionally it's going to have more of a daisy kind of appearance, but Cosmos are very easy from seed. And Black-Eyed Susans too. We think of Black-Eyed Susans as a perennial, but the annual form of Black-Eyed Susan also comes in a wide variety of interesting colors that make great flowers, great cut flowers as well. So just a couple of ones to kind of think about to get you started. There, of course, are many more annuals that you can grow as a cut flower. And if you're ever not sure if it's going to be a cut flower, just harvest one, put it in a vase and see what the life is. All of those have been suggested because they are great cut flowers in terms of the length of the vase life. But if you have something else in your garden you're curious about, feel free to test it out and see how well it does last after you harvest it. Okay, the next group I want to mention are bulbs. So obviously we do a lot of bulbs in our landscape, but we may not think about how great many of those bulbs are also going to be as cut flowers. So two categories here. We have what we call kind of the summer bulbs. It's kind of a generic term we use for that. These are typically going to be things that we're going to plant in the garden in the spring, once the ground is warm enough. We're going to grow them for the summer, enjoy the flowers. But if we want them to come back, if we want to have them again the next season, most of the time we're going to need to dig those and store them for the winter and then plant again in the spring. So dahlias, for example, if I leave my dahlia tubers in the ground at the end of the season where we're at in zone 5, they're not going to make it through. So I need to dig them, store them, and replant the next year. Contrast that to our spring flowering bulbs. These are bulbs you're going to plant in the fall, of course, and because they need a cold treatment to flower. So we're going to plant those in the fall, let them get that cold treatment, and then we're going to harvest them in the spring. And I'll show you some examples of that. And those are going to be perennials. So we're not going to typically have to dig those out. They would typically last us year after year. So looking at some examples, dahlias, excellent cut flower. If you're growing cut flowers for kind of production to sell to florists, for example, dahlias would be a very important crop. People love dahlias. They eat them up, especially for wedding work. They're just an excellent, beautiful cut flower. This one on the right here is called Cafe au lait. That's definitely my favorite dahlia for sure. It is the size of your face. It's a dinner plate dahlia in a beautiful blush color. So I definitely recommend dahlias if you haven't tried them. Gladiolus, of course, is a very kind of old-fashioned popular cut flower. You're going to plant that corm in the spring and then enjoy that beautiful vertical flower in the season. Sometimes in a protected location, if you, let's say you don't dig them up at the end of the year, if it is a protected enough site, they might come back for you. You're taking a risk, obviously, but occasionally in a protected site, you can get those to come back. And then you also have lilies. Love to grow lilies as a cut flower. Most of these would be perennials if you've got them in the right location. So these are one where you could certainly leave them in the ground, but a lot of us cut flower growers tend to grow a lily as an annual in a crate or a container. So there's also that option, but really great options on lilies too, really good ones. Okay, and then looking at the spring bulbs, so soon enough, these guys are going to be coming up. I was just checking my raised beds yesterday, and my tulips are peeking up barely out of these raised beds. So tulips are a great cut flower, but I want to mention these in particular because growing cut tulips as a cut flower is a little different of a process. So when I grow tulips, I probably have, I don't know, 500 to 600 or so planted right now in raised beds. When I plant them in these raised beds, I'm growing those tulips as an annual, and I'll tell you why here in a second. So this was last spring as they're all coming up, and then here's what we're looking for, of course, when they open up. So the reason that these are grown as an annual from a cut flower standpoint is because typically we want to get as long of stem as possible, especially if we're growing these to sell to florists or to sell at a farmer's market. For a home garden, it's not as essential, but typically for cut flower production, we want as long of stem as possible. So what they actually do to harvest these is we pull the bulb with it. So once those bulbs are to a point where they're just starting to show some color, so this one in the front here, that's mature, that's obviously open. We would want to cut this in the ones farther in the back here where they're just showing some color. That's kind of the ideal harvest stage so that we can get the longest vase life. So once they show that color, we're going to pull that entire stem, bulb attached, so that that stem still has a food source and that we've got that extra couple inches of stem that was below ground. So what I can do now then is if I don't, let's say I'm growing these for Mother's Day and there's 2 weeks to go still, I can lay these in my crate like this or lay them in a box with the bulb still attached, and I can keep them in the cooler then for a period of weeks to month or so because they have that food source still attached. So I can get a much longer life out of those if I'm not quite ready to use them in a design. So obviously then once we cut the stem, once we're ready to use it, there's no foliage left on that bulb. We've cut off the whole stem, so we're not able to replant it at that point, because as you know about bulbs, we have to leave the foliage on as long as possible so that the energy can store back in. So when we cut off the entire stem, of course, we've cut off the energy producing ability. So that's why I say we treat these as annuals, because at that point, then you just kind of toss those bulbs in the compost and you start again the next year. So if you are getting bulbs or tulips like this from the grocery store or from a florist, that's how they've grown those tulips. They've grown them as an annual, and they're replanted every season. This is one of my favorite crops to grow. It's very easy, and I just love it because it's one of those early things in the spring. So I tend to grow a lot of those. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up then with some perennials to think about. There are, of course, many perennials that make great cut flowers, but here are just some to think about, some of my favorites. And the key with perennials is to stagger out your flower times. So you want things that are going to be available to harvest in the spring, in the summer, in the fall, so that you always have that period of time where you have something great to harvest. Spring is my favorite season for perennials for sure, because when we think about annuals, most of those annuals are not going to be able to go into the ground until April, May, most of them, and they're not going to have flowers typically until June, maybe at the earliest. So there's this period of time in the spring where your annuals aren't quite ready yet. There's not much to harvest from the annuals. So you're really relying on those perennials early in the season to get you things that you can harvest. So some ideas and some of my favorites. Hellebores, love hellebores. I need to actually go out and check on mine and see if there's any flowers on them yet, because that's one of the reasons I love hellebores. It is the earliest flowering perennial that I have in my garden, and it's a shade perennial. So if you have that shade garden and you're looking to grow some flowers, highly recommend hellebores. Love hellebores, just really good color variations, and yeah, it's just that really beautiful sign of spring every year. So highly recommend those if you have a shade garden. Another one you can mix into the shade garden is bleeding hearts, another early spring lover, really great texture to add to an arrangement. I love to harvest those and bring those inside in an arrangement. Then soon after that, we're going to have the peonies popping open. Love peonies. Every year I plant more and more peonies, just expanding the amount that I have in the garden, because they're just an excellent cut flower. And again, it's in the spring when there's not a lot else available to harvest. But again, I do want to mention kind of the timing of harvesting those. So these, of course, are beautiful when they're fully open. But when we're talking about peonies as a cut flower, we want to harvest them at what we call the marshmallow stage. And what that is that when the bud is still going to be closed like this, it's showing some color. But if I took my hands and kind of gave that bud a squeeze, it shouldn't be rock hard. It should have a little bit of give to it, like a soft marshmallow. That is the ideal time to harvest those peonies for a cut flower. They're open enough that they're going to open, but they're not too far open that we've lost a lot of the vase life already. If I harvested them at this stage, I'm going to bring them in, put them in a vase, and the next day probably most of the petals will have fallen off. You're just not going to get very much vase life out of it. So we harvest them at what we call that marshmallow stage. The other reason us cut flower people do that is because we can also store them at that stage. So kind of like the tulips, I can harvest those peonies at that marshmallow stage, ship off all the foliage. I can bundle them in groups of 10 or however many, and I can wrap those stems in newspaper and put them in the cooler for a period of weeks to months out of water. We call that dry packing. So because they're harvested at that right stage, they're not overly open, they're not open, I can hold them for a period of time. So if I have a wedding, for example, that a bride really wants peonies, I can kind of manipulate that a little bit and hold them in the cooler for a longer period of time. And that's something you can do at home too. You can wrap them in newspaper, put them in the fridge, as long as there's not ethylene. You have fruits in there that's creating a lot of ethylene in the fridge. You can do that too. And then when you bring them out, you give them a fresh cut, put them in warm water, and they will open beautifully for you. But that's the stage for peonies. So since I harvest every stem of peony I grow, I don't ever need to stake my peonies. So a lot of people complain about their peonies flopping over when it rains. For me, as we're growing it as a cut flower, they are harvested off the plant far before they get to that stage. So there's really no need for that additional kind of staking. So just something to think about with your peonies this spring. Couple other great ones, of course, are iris. A lot of different varieties of iris that you can grow in the garden as cut flowers. A lot of great natives too. Liatris is an excellent cut flower. Purple coneflower is great with the petals or without. The seed pods really make great texture in an arrangement. And again, you've got more colors nowadays to choose from on those. I love to mix in Eryngium and Echinops as well. Both are really drought tolerant perennials with interesting flower heads that you can mix in for texture. Poppies are a really coveted cut flower, beautiful cut flower, a little finicky on the vase life, but beautiful. Another one for the shade would be Astilbe. Love Astilbe if you have a moist shade location. That's a great flower that you can mix in to the garden. Someone mentioned Clematis at the start. Love Clematis in the landscape, but it also is a really delicate and fun cut flower. If you can get long enough stem length on it, you can get a good couple days out of it in a vase. It's just a really great texture, and also those seed pods are really cool afterwards as well. Yarrow, I grow a ton of yarrow because that's a killer cut flower. It lasts forever. You can dry it, lots of colors to choose from. And same thing with sedum. Sedum would probably last you like months in a vase. It is just one of the toughest plants and cut flowers there is. So I grow a lot of that as well. So just a couple of great ideas. Again, like annuals, if you think, oh, maybe this would be a good cut flower, test it out, cut it, put it in a vase, and see what the vase life is. Okay, and then for time's sake, I'm not going to run through the photos of the foliages, grasses, and shrubs, but you've got it on your handout there. To me, that I think is what takes your floral design up to the next level. It's just adding those extra textural bits in there. Some of us tend to call that kind of the fairy dust that you add kind of to the arrangement to just make it unique. There's a lot of that you can gather from your garden. It's just going to take your arrangement to the next level, something you're not going to find at the grocery store. It's going to have to come straight from your garden, basically. So before I show you a quick design here, I want to cover a little bit of care. So if we're talking about harvesting these cut flowers, the stage is going to depend on the flower. So some of them you're going to harvest fully developed. So dahlias, for example, I'm going to harvest when they're fully open. Some are better cut at the bud stage. So lilies, I'm going to cut when those buds are showing some color and they're just starting to open. So it really just depends on the flower in terms of the stage. And typically we're going to recommend you harvest either later in the afternoon or the evening, because we have a lot of sugars stored up. It's had all day to photosynthesize, so that stem has a lot of food in it. And the second best time would be the morning, because there's also going to be a lot of water in the stem in that part of the day. So basically, we're just avoiding kind of midday when the sun is at its hottest. The plants don't have as much moisture in them at that point, and they really haven't had a chance to store up a lot of food in that stem. Because essentially what we're trying to do with a cut flower is to, after it's cut, is to keep it hydrated and to keep it full of food. So if we can harvest it at the stage when it is both of those to start with, it's going to give us a head start. Okay, so you're going to harvest the stems kind of as long as you need, and ideally, like I said, the longer stem is usually better. We're going to remove any foliage that's going to go into our water. So after you cut it, you're going to strip the foliage from the bottom of the stem, and then you're going to place it in warm water for a couple hours to let it really uptake water right after you harvest. So that typically means I have a bucket of warm water with me as I'm harvesting and walking throughout the garden so I can put things straight into water. Okay. And then a couple more tips about care and handling. Keep everything clean. So clean buckets, clean pruners. Your enemy here is bacteria. So that's also why we are removing any foliage that's going to be in the water. So stripping all the stems, clean stems, they're going to go straight into that water bucket. We can also add a floral preservative to that water bucket or to your vase. And any floral preservative is going to contain some sugars, some acidifier, and a bactericide. So the goal is to keep bacteria from growing in the water, to provide a little bit of sugar to the stem, and then the acidifier is also going to change the pH so that bacteria cannot grow as easily. So if you have a DIY at-home preservative that works for you, awesome. You can keep doing that for sure. But if you're thinking about trying one, think about these 3 ingredients, and does what you're going to try have at least 2 of those? So for example, if I had to recommend an at-home one, I would probably recommend something like a lemon lime soda. A splash of that added to your water, because it's going to have sugars, it's going to have some acidifier because it's citrus. You're not going to have the bactericide, of course, but it's going to give you 2 out of 3. So any at-home solution, think about, is it going to provide any of that? And then you can think about, well, if that'll work or not. All else fails, head to the florist and get some floral preservative packets. Most of the time, they are happy to give those to you. Okay, and then otherwise, we want to keep things cool and away from direct sunlight. So we're not going to put our arrangement like right into the window. That's going to age the flowers faster. We're not going to put the arrangement in front of a heating vent. That's going to age the flowers faster. So the key is to keep them cool and away from direct sunlight. That's going to give you the longest life. And then we're going to change the water frequently every day. If you can, would be awesome. If you could do anything for the life of your flowers, it would be to keep the water fresh. Keep that bacteria at bay by changing that water very frequently. So even if you don't have any preservative, if you can change the water daily, that's going to do a big job at helping really lengthen the life of your flowers. Okay, so just a couple of tips to get you going there. So with that, I'm gonna kind of stop sharing here and turn my camera back on so that we can take a look at some flowers. And then we'll do some questions too. So I'll start demo, kind of get things going, and then we can take a look at some questions, because I'm sure we have some coming in there. Oh, thanks, Sarah. Okay, so I'm going to show you just how to do a really simple hand-tied bouquet. So you can gather things from your garden, make a quick hand-tied bouquet, and then drop that bouquet into a vase, or you could leave it as a bouquet and gift it to a friend that they could drop into a vase. But I'm just going to show you a very quick, simple gathering technique to make a arrangement. So the first step, and I'm going to try to adjust my camera here. The first step is to prepare your flowers. So remember I mentioned no foliage in the water. That's the first thing you're going to do. So what I would do is I would lay all my flowers out here, and I would take my hand and I would strip all of that foliage from the bottom of my flowers. So that way I have kind of everything laid out and ready to go. So this tulip, for example, I'm going to go ahead and remove this one leaf so that I have a cleaner kind of stem to start with. So I like to prep everything first, get everything ready, and then you can lay that out in front of you and get ready to go. Because what we're going to make is just a very simple bouquet. So you've got your ingredients ready to go, and then you can start making that bouquet. So the key with a hand-tied bouquet is that you're holding everything in one hand, which I know can be tricky at first to kind of get the hang of, but I'm right-handed, so I am going to hold this bouquet in my left hand. So I'm going to start with a stock. This is a great cool season flower. It smells amazing. I love stock as a cut flower. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start adding flowers. But when I add flowers, they're all going to go into my hand, in this one spot. And what I'm trying to do at the start is to see how I have stems going at different angles. The goal is to kind of hold everything at that one point, but as I'm adding stems, I'm adding them in at different angles so that when I'm done, I'm going to end up with a very we call it a spiral technique in the flower world. But what that's going to give you is a much more open arrangement that's not going to be as crowded and close together. Because if I put all of these stems right side by side like this, all my flowers are going to be scrunched together, and you're going to need a lot more flowers to get a much bigger arrangement. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with some of that stock and some of my tulips here. I'm going to start adding those in kind of at different angles. So I kind of make a circle with my thumb and my pointer finger, and everything's kind of just holding on in between there. And some people like to go ahead and add kind of several of the same thing and just kind of go around in a circular pattern. I tend to kind of add a couple of one thing, and then I'll add the next ingredient. So I have some carnations here I can add as well. And as you're going, you're just kind of filling in some of those spaces. So I have some roses I can add in. So obviously I did not grow these in my garden. I wish I did. So I had to supplement with other flowers, but soon enough, these will all be garden flowers. Okay, so that's what I'm doing, is I'm continually adding in different flowers at different angles coming out here. So I'll add a little more stock. Okay, because at the end of this, the goal is to have essentially kind of a rounded bouquet that we can then cut the stems and drop that into a vase. And remember when I said clean stems, so everything below my stems should have no greens on it. Okay, so I'm going to keep adding. Do you want to start hitting me with some questions as I kind of keep adding in here?
Sure thing. Thank you, Candice. There was a question early on regarding black peony poppy and whether or not those poppies contain opioids, especially if you have children.
You know, I do not know off the top of my head. I'd have to look that up for you. I would say it's safe to say, just to be safe, I would assume probably the yes, just to be sure, but I'd have to research to be sure. So I can check that out and get back to you on that.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Another question on particular advice for growing lavender. I think a lot of people struggle with lavender.
Yeah, lavender is a tough one because they really struggle in our heavy clay soil. So I do not even, I've attempted lavender a couple of times, and I just do not have the best location for it. You really need a well-drained, either kind of sandy or rocky location to have the best success. There are some varieties that I have heard about that are supposed to be a little better for us here in Illinois. And I think actually I was thinking Martha Smith wrote an article about one of them one time, so we'll have to look that up for you. But yeah, if you have a very heavy, not well-drained location, lavender's going to be tough for you. It may just be something that's not going to work, or you're going to need to amend the soil to give it better drainage. The other thing to consider too is winter hardiness. Some of them are just not hardy enough for our area either.
Right, great. Cosmos, you had mentioned ways to support plants that you're growing in the garden, especially cosmos tend to flop a lot. Any particular advice for cosmos?
Yeah, so I would do that netting technique. So you could do stakes or dowel rods and use string to create your own netting, or you can purchase, it's called Hort Nova netting, and it's already a plastic netting. That's what I would do, is I would put that netting on when it's young and let it grow up through that so that it is better supported. Absolutely.
And the name of that netting again?
Hort Nova, Hortnova, I'm pretty sure is the
Okay, great. Linda had a question about winter storage of bulbs. I assume she's talking about summer bulbs in that case. That
yeah.
any particular advice for keeping them viable?
Excellent question. Biggest thing is going to be keep them cool. And when I say cool, I'm talking above freezing, but below probably mid 40s. So that's the trickiest part, is finding that great location. So this door right back here is a flower cooler. So that's where I keep mine, but obviously you probably don't have that at home. So typically it's going to be a basement that has some heat to, or a garage that has some heat to it, or a basement that's going to be that temperature. So temperature is key, and then also keeping them dry. So many will store their tubers or bulbs in sawdust, in peat moss, in vermiculite. There's a lot of different materials you could use, but you want to have something that's going to pull moisture away from those so that they don't rot through the winter as well. So keep them cool, keep them dry. That's your biggest tip there.
Okay, great. Julie was wondering about growing Impatience and Salvia from seeds. She seems to struggle with poor germination rates in that case. Do you find the same thing, or?
You know, you said Impatience, and what was the other one?
Salvia.
Salvia. I honestly do not do either of those from seed very frequently. So I don't have a great suggestion for you there, except for to do some research with the seed company that you purchase from. There's lots of them, of course. Typically, they're going to have good info on your website about any special procedures, meaning if there's a certain time that's best, or if there's a certain temperature or moisture level. It may just mean that there's a certain thing that you're not giving it that those seeds need. Maybe it's longer time or a different temperature. And if you still struggle, don't be afraid to get out there and get the transplants too. So there's some things that I have just, Lisianthus, for example. I love Lisianthus, but I will just never grow it from seed because I need to start it in January if I'm going to. And it's just a long time for me to have my setup and do things like that. So for me, it's worth it to purchase it as a transplant. But yeah, keep trying, and I would check out the seed company's site and see if they have any specific extra details for you that might be helpful.
Okay, great.